Welcome to Talking Business, a podcast produced in Melbourne, Australia. The podcast is available on the Acast site, my own website, the Apple Podcast Store, or wherever you go to get your podcasts. Or you can get it at the Business Acumen website at www.businessacumen.biz. I am Leon Gettler. My job is to review and monitor the week's news in business, finance and economics. I bring it all to you every week. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business from our website leongettler.com or whatever your favourite podcast platform is. This is episode number 32 in our series for 2025, and today's date is Friday, September the 19th. First, I'll be talking to Jennifer McCloy, an established business strategist with a background in crisis communications and venture capital. Jennifer, the founder of Baseline, will talk about the company's work tackling concussion and injury management, particularly for children, but aiming for all sport. And I'll be talking to independent economist Craig James about what to expect in the week's market. But first, let's talk to Jennifer McCloy.
Well, Jennifer, tell us about your business Baseline.
So Baseline is a digital platform that has been developed to help sports clubs and parents to assess and manage concussions and injuries. We've been around for a couple of years, but we are just about to launch the latest iteration of the product. And as we have talked about, it's quite a timely issue at the moment, concussion. It's something that every sport at the moment is looking to combat, I suppose is the word. And that's where we come in. So we're there to help these sports really actually properly manage it, not just pretend to manage it. That's the way we talk about it.
But some of it's actually related to the nature of the sport, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean,
people are brought down in tackles or, hits and all of that sort of stuff. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, so I'm so glad you say that, because it's not really specific to contact sport. It's something that, a lot of kids, I mean, obviously kids that have PE at school, they're running around at school all the time. I've got a little 2-year-old. He's always running around everywhere and banging into things. So, it's more just about protecting kids specifically is what we're looking at. And it's about protecting them anytime they're active.
Right. So it's mostly with children.
Yeah. So that's our big focus at the moment. Our big goal for next year is to baseline every child in Australia. So that's our big goal for next year.
Would you start doing sports as well?
Yeah. So sports is something, I mean, obviously we'll work with the codes to do that, but we will be working with the schools in order to baseline all the kids in the school.
Okay. And so how did you actually start this?
Yeah, so I've actually moved back from the UK in 2018, and I was chatting to a friend who is a sports doctor, and she was a doctor for the Waratahs, and she was telling me how terribly managed it was, and I don't have a medical background, but she was telling me how poorly managed concussions were even at a professional level, and she had developed a very basic app to help herself manage the concussions for the Waratahs. And I took one look at it and thought, you know what, this is actually a problem. This is a real issue. I had a terrible ski accident about 7 years ago and a terrible concussion. I was very lucky to have no kind of long-lasting effects, but that's kind of, I suppose, what you'd call my connection with the issue. And I could see that it was something that wasn't being done properly. So we started to work together, and then over some time, Chris, who's now my co-founder, who was involved sort of at a helicopter level, he came to me and said, you know what, let's really give this a go. Let's build a whole new platform. Let's talk to insurers. Let's talk to schools. Let's go. So that's where it came from. And my friend and obviously we have a team of medical advisors behind us, helping us with that. And it's something that, as I've learned a lot more about it over the last couple of years, it's a pretty alarming issue, and it's pretty worrying for parents particularly. And I know that a lot of parents my age, I'm 37. A lot of my friends having kids are saying, "Oh, look, my kids are just going to play tennis. I'm too scared of all the head injuries that they could possibly have." And where I'm a rugby girl. I grew up. My family was from the country, and we were very into rugby. And I've got a son, and I think it's a part of Australian brick to play contact sports. So we just want to make sure that these kids can do that in a safe and protected manner.
And it's about time. I mean, because I remember coming down with an injury when I was playing soccer at school.
Yeah.
And that was soccer, for goodness sake. It wasn't rugby. It wasn't Australian rules football. And there was no. The teacher said, just take it easy and just get back into it.
Yeah, no worries, you'll be right. Is the kind of
the
phrase.
And I think about it now, and I think I was very lucky that I didn't come out from.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, my father played rugby for a very long time. And when I started to look into this, he was feeling very worried. It's one of those things where, you know, you can't look back, you can only look forwards. And it's just the way that it's the Aussie nature to say, you know, you'll be right, keep going. And we didn't have the knowledge that we have now. You know, and I think that's something that, I mean, for Chris and I, we both love sport. And one of the goals for us is to help contact sport or help sport continue, because a lot of these sports are going to come up against really big insurance issues if they aren't addressing concussion properly.
Yeah.
So, and we've seen that in the States with the NFL that have got a $500 million lawsuit against class action. And, you know, if that happens.
The same thing with the AFL.
And I was just about to say with the AFL. So, and really the AFL, honestly, is probably the only sport in Australia that would maybe be able to self-insure if they had to. But, you know, it's not something, and these insurers don't want to see, you know, there's a lot of guys that work in insurance that love sport too. You know, we don't want to see Australian sport come under the hammer too much, but at the same time, we've got to stop seeing these sports just doing PR/CSR box ticking exercises when it comes to concussion and saying, oh yes, we've just changed our policy and that now everything's better. And it doesn't work like that. So what baseline does is we'll baseline a child or a player at the beginning of that. Well, if we onboard them at the age of 7, you do a baseline test on them. You can do a baseline test at any age of your life, but you should do it once and never again. And you baseline them, and that will be saved in the platform so that then if there is ever a concussion, that is accessible on the spot.
You've gone into other areas, your business, your career activities, haven't you?
Yes.
So tell us about that.
So other areas that I've worked in, is that what? Yeah. So, I mean, look, I've had a very, I would say, a generalist career. I started, I'll just do it chronologically because it's probably the easiest way. Started off my career in corporate PR, doing a lot of risk management for sort of banks and in bigger corporations. Absolutely loved it. Probably stayed in it for 12 months too long because I loved it so much. But while I was there, I actually started Jennifer Kate, which was my fashion label. And it was very much my PR girl at the time used to tell me to stop saying this in interviews, but she's not here now. So I used to say it happened by accident. She used to say it happened organically, but it happened by accident. I was just importing and selling things just for a bit of, you know, cash on the side. And then I started to make little changes to them. And I was, you know, and it was all apparel. And it just got to a point where I had a few people that were interested and retailers and things and agents, and then it just went from there. So managed that grew that for 7 years, and it was a pretty amazing time. Did a couple of fashion weeks, you know, had my pieces on all the celebrities and et cetera, and it was all very exciting. But I always say a fantastic way to cut my teeth as a small business owner, because fashion is a cutthroat area. And I was sitting there, it was my first show at Fashion Week, and it was honestly the most surreal moment. I was thinking to myself, I don't have any technical training, and I have somehow gotten myself to this point, but I knew how to employ and work with people that were better than me. You know, that's the best thing you can do as a small business owner, is get people in your business that love it and are just better at you at things. So better than you at things. So that was an amazing time. Moved on from that in 2017, and we moved to the UK for a couple of years, where my husband was doing his MBA, and I managed to land a job in a venture capital firm, again with zero technical experience, and it was a fantastic thing to do, because a lot of the partners over there, you know, just got 9-to-5 jobs kind of thing, and that was great. But I knew that I wanted to learn. I knew that I was going to be doing capital raises over my lifetime, and many of them. And I wanted to learn how it worked. I wanted to learn how, you know, VC works. And so I was running a fund over there, which was amazing, for a couple of years. And then, as I said, when we moved back, that brings us back to where we were when I was catching up with my friend from the Waratahs when we moved back from the UK, and that's that. And
then you set up Baseline.
Yeah, so Baseline's been running for a couple of years, and then recently I've also started working with a couple of guys from our local surf club who have a brilliant idea that is going to, I hate the word disrupt. I honestly think it's overused and shocking. So it's going to improve the recruitment industry. And we've been working pretty hard on that, but that's sort of embryonic stages. So, it's interesting time.
Well, Jennifer, that's all fascinating stuff, and wishing you and Baseline all the best.
Oh, thank you very much.
And now let's talk to independent economist Craig James.
Well, Craig, what's your assessment for the market in the week ahead?
Well, hopefully it'll be onward and upward. Yes, for the share market, it's been performing so well right the way across the globe. But the Aussie dollar doesn't seem to move. It doesn't matter what's going on. The Aussie dollar is, sort of pretty constant, and now the focus is on just keeping inflation under control, and that's the United States, it's Australia, that's everywhere, keeping inflation under control. And if that's the case, then we can have sort of lower interest rates. I suppose in the coming week in Australia, the highlight will be the Reserve Bank Governor before the House of Representatives Economic Committee on Monday. It's certainly going to be a lot of interesting questions. And Michelle Bullock, sort of has indicated that she's fairly open in terms of her language. So if she's more likely to say, if asked interest rate cut, no, I don't think so, rather than, well, we'll just see the circumstances at the time and we'll weigh everything up and the usual RBA speak. So we'll see what she has to say on Monday.
And what about other stuff during the week?
We've got the monthly consumer price index coming out on Wednesday. It's still within the 2 to 3% target band, but more likely to be shifting up towards the top end of that band. I mean, that's something we've got to watch fairly carefully. There's not too much else in terms of Australian economic data. One indicator that occurs right the way around the world is the Flash Purchasing Managers Index. It's a gauge of both manufacturing and services activity. So that's coming out on Monday the 22nd. And then we look ahead to Wednesday, and the monthly consumer price index is out. We've got data on engineering construction happening also, and detailed labour force figures. And then later in the week, we've got wealth figures. And the two main measures of wealth in Australia are house prices and share prices. The share market's at or near record highs. Home prices continue to rise. People's wealth levels are rising. Now, I don't know whether people feel that they've got that sense of worth, but certainly the wealth figures show that our wealth continues to rise.
Right, and of course, we've got the details of the labour force figures, which came out the week before.
Yes, that's right. And yes, that's always interesting. It gets down to a regional basis, an age group basis, and finds out where the jobs are, where the jobs aren't, who's in the labour force. Are the Green Army, if you like. It's not the Green Army, the Grey Army is the Grey Army. People of my vintage, so going out there complicating the labour force, or actually adding to it in terms of supply, and how much is people like so overseas students and overseas travellers providing in terms of activity as well. The United States got a number of Federal Reserve speakers. It's always interesting to see what they've got to say and shed some light on future interest rate decisions and data on home prices, homes, existing home sales, new home sales, and we've got final GDP figures. One of the biggies in the United States right at the tail end of the week is the private consumption expenditure deflator. So it's got a convoluted name, but the core deflator is expected to rise by 0.3% up to around about 2.9. So again, like Australia, we've got inflation in the target band, but central banks would like it probably closer to 2% rather than 3%. And that'll be interesting to see if it does continue to hover at the top end of the range, what sort of communication we get from central bank policymakers.
Yes, and of course, with the Fed cutting interest rates, that's going to put pressure on the RBA as well.
My word, certainly no one can say that the Australian economy is going gangbusters at the moment. Inflation's under control, and more importantly, I think looking forward, inflation is expected to remain under control, and that's always an important thing for policymakers. Not just that inflation is in the band, but expected to remain in the band. It's always got to be forward-looking in terms of monetary policy, and so we'll see what those gauges are derived from the personal income and spending figures, which will come out on Friday. The measures of inflation. But I suppose what would you say at the moment, around the markets, there's a sense of relative calm. Markets have been performing quite well, and that's because US and Australian companies have produced some pretty reasonable profit results of late, and we'll just have to see whether this good run continues.
Indeed, and it doesn't really matter if inflation, even if it rises to the top of the target band, it's still under control.
Yes, it's very, very clear that central bankers, even those central bankers which may have their jobs on the line, like in the United States, are still very much focused on that inflation story. But it's not just inflation now; it's inflation and jobs. And you've got to have the last thing that any central bank wants to see is a loss of jobs. Yes, we've worked very, very hard in Australia and in other parts of the world to get the unemployment rate to effectively full employment status. And so the last thing you want to see is interest rates held too high for too long and ruining the good credentials that we've got on board.
Even if jobs numbers, unemployment numbers rise by maybe 0.1%, it doesn't really matter.
No, I think it's a case of 3 to 4%, around that sort of order of magnitude, is considered to be relative full employment. This is the hard part for central bankers, they always get asked if we're at full employment, does that mean that wages are more likely to rise and prices are likely to rise? But it's looking through both the supply and the demand aspects. And I think central bankers, you can never get it perfect. You can never get it totally right. But an economy which is growing, producing jobs, inflation, under control. People, have got aspirations for pay increases and working hard towards that. And those people, at or near retirement, pleasantly surprised that, their savings and superannuation more broadly is continuing to hold on.
So it'll be the big figure for the week will be the CPI figures.
Well, we'll be looking ahead to the following week. So the monthly CPI is on Wednesday, and then you go out to the 31st, and then you'll get the consumer price index. So certainly inflation still very much on the uppermost minds of people. It's interesting too, if you're thinking about inflation, it's not just the goods components, but it's services component. And the hard part really is the services component, because you've got a lot of Gen Y quite happy to go out there and get haircuts and meals and the like. And then you've got baby boomers going out there spending some of their savings. And that's where inflation is more likely to come from.
Services inflation just keeps rising.
Yeah, services inflation is something that is a hard one for the Reserve Bank to monitor. So, but yes, we'll continue to wait and watch, the indicators that are coming through. The last full consumer price index reading that we had was on the 30th of July, and the next reading is not until the 29th of October. So we've got to continue to watch these monthly consumer price index readings between them. They're not as good as the quarterly measure, not yet, but certainly the intention is to beef up that so we can have a true reading of inflation on a monthly basis.
The one on the 29th of October will be the quarterly one, which will be giving
Yes.
the RBA sufficient room to think about what to do with interest rates in November.
Yeah, my word. So looking down the track, and certainly to date, I think most people wouldn't have had too many disagreements with the Reserve Bank's judgments, and I would just have to wait and see. We've got the Reserve Bank meeting in the following week, not this coming week, but the following week, coming out with their estimates of how the economy is performing. So and that'll determine of course whether we get get interest rate cuts.
And indeed, and Michelle Bullock herself has said interest rates are fine, interest rate cuts are fine, but don't expect too many more.
Yes, and I think that's fair enough. What she's trying to do is downplay expectations. No, she doesn't want to get anyone comfortable. If you're truly comfortable about things, then the potential is that you're more likely to trend to optimism, to spend and the like. And she wants to ensure that people are watching the indicators very carefully, not taking anything for granted. And I think that's an interesting term for us to focus on, not taking anything for granted. The unemployment rate will continue to rise, to continue to sit around about 4%. That will continue to have a record share market, that you continue to have to do your sums, and I think that's an important point. And the Reserve Bank is taking nothing for granted as well. If those inflation figures don't play nicely, then you won't get any more interest rate cuts, which is bad news for those people going out there wanting to buy properties. That you don't get those interest rate cuts, but for the self-funded retirees, like myself, happy, that interest rates are still relatively high and providing a good return on your money.
Well, Craig, that's all quite fascinating, and thank you very much for your time.
So what's happening in the news? Well, President Trump entered the White House in January promising both the largest deportation program in American history and a golden age for American businesses. But in recent weeks, the tension between those two promises spilled out into the open, leading Mr. Trump to reverse or contradict some of his most significant anti-immigration policies when they threatened to disrupt the economy. Mr. Trump has celebrated his success in driving down illegal border crossings and in cracking down on immigration more broadly, but he walks a careful line when his hardline policies collide with his economic agenda, particularly when it comes to foreign workers, student visas and industries that rely on immigrant labour. The changes in positions have not only infuriated his far-right allies, but have also confused those aiming to carry out his deportation policies. His heart isn't in the nativist purge, the way that the rest of the administration's heart is into it, said David J. Beer, the Director of Immigration Studies at the Cato Institute. He's always been someone who likes to dabble in that type of rhetoric, but at the same time he's always had a soft spot for the economic needs from a business perspective. Mr. Trump last week faced an uproar after immigration agents arrested nearly 500 workers, most of them South Korean citizens, at the construction site of an electrical vehicle factory in Georgia. The raid caused deep anger in South Korea, a key US ally and trading partner, and had the potential to discourage exactly the kind of foreign investment in US manufacturing that Mr. Trump is trying to achieve. Even though the Trump administration had argued the workers were in the United States illegally, Mr. Trump temporarily paused the deportations to consider allowing the South Korean workers to stay in the United States and help finish the factory, according to officials in Seoul. Most of the workers did end up returning to South Korea. Mr. Trump similarly appeared to pull back on his hardline approach to student visas when it risked upending the finances of American colleges and universities. In May, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced that the Trump administration would work to aggressively revoke visas of Chinese students and that the administration would enhance scrutiny of future applicants from China. Chinese undergraduates often pay full tuition for their education. Nearly 2 months later, Mr. Trump shocked his conservative allies when he said he would let 600,000 Chinese students into American universities. I like that other countries' students come here, Mr. Trump says. And you know what would happen if they didn't? Our college system would go to hell very quickly. And a federal appeals court denied President Trump's attempt to block Lisa Cook, a Federal Reserve governor, from participating in a key meeting at the central bank. The decision, split 2-1 along party lines, marks another defeat for the White House's effort to control the Fed and economic policy. Mr. Trump has sought to oust Cook over allegations of mortgage fraud, though Cook has not been charged with any wrongdoing. The Federal Reserve Act specifies that presidents can only fire Fed governors for cause, and Trump has sought to leverage allegations of mortgage fraud as a sufficient cause for firing. The court's decision comes just weeks after Trump said he fired Cook, who responded by suing Trump based on an unsubstantiated allegation, and that her firing violated her due process rights. If Mr. Trump is ultimately successful in removing Cook, it would mark the first time a Fed governor was fired by a president in the central bank's 111-year history. And China has formally invited Donald Trump to Beijing for a summit with President Xi Jinping. But here's the problem. The White House has not yet responded, as the countries are still far away apart, trade issues and the flow of fentanyl. Earlier this month, when Putin and Modi met Xi Jinping in Beijing, Trump wrote on Truth Social that it looks like the US had lost India and Russia to deepest, darkest China. So any meeting in Beijing is in doubt. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Sunday met Chinese Vice President He Lifeng in Madrid for a fourth round of negotiations, negotiating a deal over TikTok, whose future has been in limbo for months as Washington pushed ByteDance, its parent company, to sell its US operation to American investors. Some hope that will pave the way for President Trump to visit Beijing just before the October 31st Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum in South Korea. In recent days, two US cabinet officials, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Peter Hegseth, have spoken to their Chinese counterparts, raising speculation about a meeting between the president. But insufficient progress in the US-China talks have reduced the odds of a Beijing summit. So now it's more likely that Trump and Xi will hold a lower-profile meeting at APEC, aka the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. Still, China needs a deal because its economic slowdown deepened in August, with exports to the US falling off drastically. Pressure is growing for Trump and Xi to meet in person, something seen as key to achieving a permanent truce. That might be what is driving the TikTok development, that it's a carrot to get Trump to visit China. And Super Retail, the owner of Rebel Sport, is hunting for a new chief executive after Anthony Herity was fired for lying to the board about an alleged affair with the company's former head of human resources, Jane Kelly. The listed retailer, which also owns the BCF, Super Cheap Auto and Macpac brands, said the decision followed new information provided by Herity at the end of last week. After reviewing the information, the board concluded that his earlier disclosures were inadequate. In light of this new information, the board has concluded Mr. Herity's prior disclosures were not satisfactory, the company said on Tuesday. But if Judith Swales, who heads the board, and her fellow directors want applause, they are likely to be sorely disappointed. At every possible turn, the board has mishandled this sordid episode, and now it must deal with the consequences. The bottom line, Super Retail has been entangled in a high-profile court battle with two former legal executives for more than a year. They are whistleblowers, and at the centre of their embarrassing claims was the alleged relationship between the chief executive and the head of Human Resources Division. In April 2024, Super Retail entered mediation with former legal chief Rebecca Farrell and a former co-worker, Amelia Becherly, over their claims of bullying, harassment, the alleged misuse of funds, and failing to provide a safe workplace and breaches of governance. The board, then led by Sally Pitkin, said Super Retail had engaged an independent external law firm to investigate the claims, which at the time it said were unsubstantiated. Judith Swales took over as chairman following the company's annual meeting in last October after Pitkin stepped down. Pitkin remains part of the case before the federal court, which was launched in July last year after the failed mediation. Earlier this month, Bahamas workplace lawyers representing the two ex-legal employees issued 35 subpoenas to companies and individuals to provide documents that are relevant to their claims. The case is due to be heard in February. The Australian Securities Investments Commission has very recently conducted interviews with Herity and Kelly as part of an investigation into the circumstances surrounding the whistleblower complaints made by Farrell and Becherly. Whether the ASIC interviews forced the board to examine the past disclosures by Herity is not clear. However, the board and its chief executive spent the weekend locked in intense discussions that have resulted in his brutal termination. The termination places Super Retail among a growing list of global companies grappling with the fallout from allegations about office relationships. Nestlé executive Lawrence Frage was fired last month after investigators found he had not declared a relationship with a subordinate. In July, Astronomer Chief Executive Andy Byron resigned after being filmed on a stadium kiss cam with the firm's chief people officer at a Coldplay concert. And ANZ will cut the pay of current and former executives after it was hit with a record $240 million fine by the corporate watchdog for misconduct, leading to warnings that the bank's board could face a second strike on its remuneration report at its annual general meeting. Former Chief Executive Shane Elliott, who led the board from 2016 until May this year, is among those whose pay could be clawed back after the Melbourne-based bank promised further accountability as part of its response to the scandal. Former retail banking boss Mal Carnegie and recently departed markets chief Anshel Sidher are also likely to have their remuneration scrutinised. The Australian Securities Investments Commission and ANZ will ask the federal court to impose the $240 million fine to settle a case brought by the corporate regulator after the bank admitted to incorrectly reporting bond trading data to the federal government, as well as widespread misconduct at its retail division that affected tens of thousands of customers. ASIC chairman Joe Longo slammed the company's behaviour as grubby. There are fundamental issues with ANZ's risk and compliance culture that require the board and executives' urgent attention, he said. MST Marquee banking analyst Brian Johnson warned that the bank's board, led by Chairman Paul O'Sullivan, was at risk of facing a second shareholder strike against its remuneration board at the upcoming annual general meeting in December. If that happened, it would trigger a vote on whether to hold so-called spill meeting, where all directors must stand for re-election. The ANZ board has not done a particularly good job, said Johnson. ANZ shareholders are set to pick up the tab for the $240 million fine, as well as a further $250 million that ANZ revealed that it would spend to address shortcomings at its non-financial risk management practices. It will submit the plan to the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority on September the 30th. The plan follows an independent review that identified persistent weaknesses in its non-financial risk management across 6 areas: culture, capabilities and consequences, accountability, governance and reporting, policies and practices, and prioritisation and execution. The matters for which ANZ was fined include the management of a $14 billion government bond deal in April 2023, and also its incorrect reporting of bond trading data to the federal government, where it overstated volumes by tens of billions of dollars over nearly 2 years. ANZ has agreed to pay $125 million in relation to this matter. That settlement comes after a 2-year probe into the actions of ANZ's traders after it was appointed to manage the interest rate risk associated with a $14 billion bond sale by the Australian Office of Financial Management. That investigation was expanded to include allegations that ANZ inflated the amount of government bonds it traded, putting it in line to be awarded lucrative government debt sale roles. In the bond trading case, ANZ was in a trusted position and its conduct had the potential to reduce the amount of funding available to the government, Longo said. This funding is used to support critical services, including Australia's health and education systems, affecting all Australians. When public funds are put at risk, every Australian pays a price. In ANZ's retail division, the regulator said the bank had failed to refund fees charged to thousands of dead customers and also did not respond to family members dealing with deceased estates in a timely manner. It was also fined for making false and misleading statements on savings interest rates, where it didn't pay the correct rate to tens of thousands of customers. And insufficient action on climate change will lead to significant productivity losses by 2060, according to new research from Oxford Economics Australia. The economic research body, which will release the full details of its modelling next week, has called for the government to look past short-term pain when settling emissions reduction targets. Our analysis shows that while the transition to net zero carries short-term costs, it secures higher productivity and resilience in the long run, said Alex Hooper, head of climate and energy economics. Doing nothing on climate change may look safe in the short run, but from 2035 it sets us on a steady decline. While OEA had not finalised its modelling on an appropriate 2035 emissions reduction target, Head of Consulting Christian Colding said it should be both feasible and ambitious. In an era of short-term attention spans, we cannot afford to have short-term thinking, Colding said. One of the major factors in the OEA modelling contributing to expected productivity losses was the severe physical damage caused by extreme weather events, which are predicted to occur with accelerating frequency. We're in a world where increasing investment in our economy is directed towards maintenance and replacing our capital stock rather than investing in new productive capacity, said Hooper. Over time, that just erodes our ability to produce as much with the same dollar would otherwise in a baseline scenario. OEA's modelling has changed over time, incorporating new knowledge and best science practice. A couple of years ago, most forecasters or estimators linked economic damage related to climate change to average temperatures, said Hooper. There's been a recognition that average temperatures aren't really enough because we also have this volatility, which in a place like Australia is leading to things like our big flood events. So now we take that into account. OEA also highlighted macro-scale changes in the construction sector that presented opportunities for the energy transition. The research suggests that work on the publicly funded transportation boom has peaked and investment, primarily private, is shifting to the electricity sector, which is witnessing record levels of construction as transmission and energy distributions are built as part of the energy transition. But Adrian Hart, OEA's Director of Construction and Infrastructure Consulting, said the most significant barrier to utilising this opportunity was a mismatch in the skills of Australian workers. The Albanese government will reveal its much-anticipated 2035 emissions reduction target this week, a range target of at least 60% or more emissions reductions on 2005 levels, as is expected. And 1 million homes will be in very high-risk zones by 2050 and effectively uninsurable, the National Climate Risk Assessment has warned, with the wider economy expected to take a hit from the effects of climate change. alongside a loss in property value of $611 billion by 2050 under a 2 degrees Celsius warming scenario. The first national assessment warns of $211 billion in lost wealth from reduced labour productivity. It paints a picture for housing where, even under 2 degrees Celsius warming, some areas will become too costly to live, and planning laws for construction and home insurance business models will have to change. The report's release comes days ahead of the federal government announcing a 2035 target for reducing emissions. It will be taken to New York, where other nations will also submit their updated targets. The Climate Change Authority says based on current global commitments, the world is expected to warm by about 2.9 degrees Celsius if those commitments are met. Emma Aisbert, economist at the Australian National University, says the $611 billion hit to property values modelled in the National Assessment is only the accounting of an expected economic contraction. What's really driving in these models that loss in property values is actually the contraction of the economy. It's the fact that industries are dying, that people can't afford the houses, Dr. Aisbert said. The property losses from disasters and rising sea levels that actually comes on top of those effects that they are modelling. The insurance industry has already sounded the alarm that its long-term sustainability is at risk from climate change. Insured losses from insurance catastrophes have grown from 0.2% of gross domestic product over 1995 to 2000 to 0.7% of GDP over 2020 to 2024. And already 15% of household insurance premiums can be priced at more than 4 weeks of gross household income, according to the report, which forecasts insurance costs will also rise for properties that can be insured. There are homes at threat from bushfire, from flooding, and from rising sea levels, Dr. Aisbert said. All of these disasters are systemic risks, and the current insurance industry cannot support dealing with that systemic risk because the way insurance works is it's meant to be an unusual event, and you got unlucky, therefore we insure that risk. When up to 1 million homes are at risk, the industry, as it is currently regulated and set up, cannot handle that. And if projects can't be insured, can't be built because no one can take that sort of risk on, people don't always appreciate how crucial insurance is to actually getting investment happening. And that's it for this week. And next week I'll be